Yeah, I've started recording. Yeah, okay, we've started now. We're good.
Okay, brilliant. So thank you. So um, I am I am delighted to announce the third talk in our sixth global seminar series here for the IFNTF, and it's entitled Powergogy, a Power-Centered Pedagogy, and it's delivered by Dr. Pablo Dalby of the University of East Anglia in the UK. So over to you, Pablo.
Thank you. A warm welcome, everyone. I've turned my camera off because I'm having Zoom issues. It's crashing on me all the time. Apologies for the tech issues at the start. It's the first time that's ever happened. I don't know what happened, but we'll try and do our best. So I already shared with you a 1 minute introduction video to myself on the session pack, which had like a sensory description of what I look like and a description of my social identity. So I won't talk about myself anymore. I won't ask you to introduce yourself because there's a lot of people, but if you'd like to say hi in the chat, please feel free. So let's move on. If you wouldn't mind moving the slides along, please, that would be great. I do have each item as a coming up one at a time. Apologies. So because it's more accessible. So just a brief reminder of the accessibility information for the session. I did cover this in the session pack in more detail, but as Martina said, we're using selective recording. Next one, please. Yeah, please open the session pack and keep it tabbed. We can just keep, yeah. In section B1 of the session pack, you will find helpful resources. That includes a link to live subtitles that you can translate on your device into different languages if you want that. Next one, please. And yeah, please let me know if I'm not meeting any of your learning needs and I'll try and change that. Okay, let's move through, please. Thank you. So we've already spent 10 minutes on this, but we'll try and move through here. Very briefly, is the session for you? Yes, it is, absolutely. We can keep moving through. Power relations relate to all of us. We're all involved in learning in different contexts, in different ways, and I appreciate everyone is coming in from diverse contexts. We may not all teach in formal education, but we all facilitate learning, as I said. So yeah, it's relevant to everyone. And just a few points before we start. Please note that Powergogy, it can be adapted to different contexts. That doesn't mean I'm saying it's necessarily universal. There might be contexts in which it's inappropriate or difficult to implement. It relates both to the process of teaching and learning and also the content, and they're mixed together often. We can't cover it fully in 1 hour today, of course, so we'll just have a taster and set you off on the way to understanding. And it's continuing evolving. It's a work in progress. You're invited to contribute, collaborate with me, and help develop the framework further. And a reminder of the session overview. Again, I covered this in the session pack in more detail, but the main aims is basically for you to understand the main ideas and principles behind Powergogy, be more familiar with the Powergogy framework, and critically consider how you might apply it in your context if you're interested in that. Also, I'll signpost you to some additional resources. Thanks so much for moving the slides. You're doing a great job. And thank you all for being here, by the way. I really appreciate your time. Brief outline of the activities. After this intro, we'll go into a questions activity, which is a kind of relaxed, informal combination of some quiz questions with your questions and discussion. Then we'll have a short break because that's inclusive. Then after the break, you're going to have a choice of activities to do. I'll explain it at the time, but one of them will be a map challenge activity. One of them will be a case study of the revolving roles model. And so both the map challenge and the revolving roles, they're both activities from the Powergogy framework. So it's a chance for you to try out what we're talking about. And you have the choice of just spending the time as you like with self-directed learning if you want. Then we'll have a summary at the end of the session. And lastly, the style of the session is going to be interactive. It won't just be me talking the whole time. There is a structure to it, but it's flexible. So bear in mind, everything is optional. Of course, you can do whatever you want. It's your time. You're in control of your learning. And these are some of the Powergogy principles in practice. We're using multimodal communication. In other words, there's many ways that you can communicate. this is an accessible thing to do. So of course you can come onto mic and comment anytime you want verbally. If you want to, you can write in the Zoom chat if you want to, of course. Or if you want to comment anonymously, you'll see a link to the anonymous back channel in the session pack in that section of useful resources. If you click that, send a message, I'll see it. I'll be the only one who sees it. No one else will see it, and I won't know who you are, but we'll respond to the comment, to the ideas, if you like, so we can benefit from it. So, for example, if you've got a question that you're embarrassed to ask, this is a way to do it. All right. And lastly, before we go on, please just know these things. I try to practice what I preach and kind of walk the talk, if you like. So I try to use some of the Powergogy principles in today's session. It is a little challenge in this context, but so bear in mind the medium is the message. The way that we're doing the session is part of the message. And again, I aim to be the guide by the side, if you like, not the sage on the stage. And I think this is important. I'm ready to be wrong about everything. In other words, I'm ready to change my mind and change perspectives. And I think that's crucial to point out. Thank you. All right. Before we move into the questions activity, just a brief introduction here of the Powergogy framework. This was in the pre-session materials. You have access to all these materials after the session as well. So I won't talk about this in great detail here. There is a differently accessible version available on the pre-session materials. And I'm just going to briefly describe this in case anyone can't see it for whatever reason. So we've got it's a visual representation of the Powergogy framework, which is a set of kind of principles and ideas and practices for implementing Powergogy. So we've got a big circle, which is like 6 concentric circles. And from the middle, it works its way out. At the middle of the circle, you've got the central premise of Powergogy, which is to critique, challenge, and change power structures. So help teachers and learners, anyone, to be able to do that and develop their power literacies, if you like, to do that. Then you've got outside that some core principles like participative, transformative, inclusive, etc. Then you've got some crux concepts and theories of power. So this is more about the content now. So this is dimension 3 of the 6 dimensions, the 6 circles. And this is learning about, for example, sources of power, levels of power, expressions of power. We'll touch briefly on some of these today. The session is obviously not focused on examining power itself in great depth. It's more about how we could facilitate this learning for other people. Then we've got like crucial processes, for example, like normalizing accessibility, which is what I'm trying to do now to some extent. Then we've got level 5, dimension 5 is practices. So like concrete practices, I call them. So like non-abstract, actual practical things that you can do. And then level 6, the outside, is the kind of the critical purpose, the big picture purpose that we're trying to move towards from inside the circle to the outside. And that involves, personal change, social change, systemic change, structural change. So if you could just press whoever's doing the slides. So at the moment, for example, I'm going to go through and just show you, that's fine, just with those 3, thanks. I'm just going to show you, that's all right. If you just go back one moment, I'm just going to highlight as we go through. My apologies. That's fine, just like that. As we go through this session, I'll just briefly highlight some of the practices I'm trying to use. So already I've tried to be inclusive, for example, in line with the core principles. I've tried to normalize accessibility by just providing, for example, subtitles and captions for everyone. I don't know if you need them or not, but I'm just anticipating that someone might and making that normal. And also some real-time reflexivity, which is basically just practicing, just reflecting critically on our own practice in real time as it happens, openly with other people, and inviting them to join us in that and critique the practice if you want. So for example, already today, I've got various things I'm going to reflect on about the start of the session and how I could maybe improve that for myself. Thank you. Let's move through. Thanks so much. All right. So now that is the end of the slides for this section. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to go through to the questions section. Would you mind just going through on the session pack to the B3, section B3 questions. And I do appreciate that. The way that I've structured the session was intended to have many benefits, but because I can't screen share, it has made it a little more complicated. So what I'm going to do is instead of making it really difficult for the colleague who's helping here with the screen share, on your session pack, can each of you go
I've got
to?
it. I've got it.
You've got
Sorry,
it. Okay,
to go
that's
back
fine.
into the pack.
That's
It's
fine.
It's
Yes,
Penny, by the way. If you haven't met me,
Penny.
I'm
Thank you.
Penny.
Sorry. Thank you. Sorry, I apologize.
How do you go to the beginning? There we are.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Good.
All right. So we're just going to spend about 15 minutes on this, possibly a little less now because we're behind. We can move through. Thank you. And I'll just briefly outline what we're going to do.
Doesn't want to move on.
Okay. So yeah, we've already talked about how we've touched on these three parts of the framework. And if you just click a couple more times, Penny, thanks. Now we're going to be touching on some participative values. You're going to be participating. And one more, please. Thank you. And developing power literacy a little bit, because we'll be talking about a couple of different concepts of power in this activity. And just one more. And so one of those concepts we'll be talking about is the idea of expressions of power from Venner-Claassen and Miller. All right, great. Let's move through now to the questions. So just a brief reminder of what we're going to do. It's based on the pre-session task. It's going to be anonymous. You can click through, Penny. Thank you. So it's anonymous. Doesn't count towards anything, just a bit of fun, formative assessment, if you like. If you've done the pre-session task, it will reinforce your learning and extend it, hopefully. And if you haven't, don't worry. I've designed it inclusively so it doesn't depend on you doing the pre-session task. It's just an interactive way to engage with the content for the first time if you didn't. Okay, great. Now, this is how you can participate in the quiz. You can either go online on WooClap. If you go to the session pack, you will see in section B3 questions. If you scroll down, item 2 is the WooClap quiz platform. If you click on that, it will take you through to the WooClap quiz. Or you can just go to wooclap.com and enter the code Powergogy. But lastly, if you don't want to use WooClap, that's fine. You can just answer on paper, on a device, in your head. The main thing is you're engaging with the content. And the next one, and you can answer on your own or you can discuss with others in the Teams chat. It's about learning actively. All right, let's go through. Don't worry about the break. We will just do the quiz. And all right, I'm going to display a question. Unfortunately, it's not going to display on your screen because I'm unable to screen share. And in this case, it's not going to work, Penny, for you to do that because you would need to be logged in to my WooClap account. But
Okay.
everyone should still be able to answer the questions. All right. So I'm just going to read out the questions and see how we get on here. So basically, the first question is power can be understood in many ways. To what extent do you think this broad definition that I'm providing is helpful as a starting point for us today? Just rank it between one and 5. And 1 is extremely unhelpful and 5 is extremely helpful. And the definition, the very broad definition, is that Powergogy is that power is the capacity to affect a change. Let's see what results you've got. You may not be able to see the results on the screen. You would be if I was screen sharing, but we've got a broad selection. Power is a contested concept, right? We could spend all day, all week talking about it. And we've got the majority of people, about 70% of people answering like 3 or 4. So more or less happy with that as a starting definition. 20% of people saying a 2 and a few people saying a 5. So my aim here is really just to have a very broad starting point for what I mean by power. In other words, I'm not talking about like the power to charge your smartphone. We're talking about social power and this idea that it could be the capacity to affect a change of some kind, to make something happen, whether that's positive, negative, or whatever. I think this broad definition can accommodate most of the understandings of power that we might discuss today, but I'm also ready to be wrong. That's fine. At any point now, please do come in if you've got any comments or questions you'd like to share about any of these questions or points. This is definitely a discussion-based activity. Okay, I mentioned that we'll just touch a little bit on one basic way to understand power. So this is by Venneklassen and Miller, and they talk about 4 expressions of power. So what I'd like you to do on the quiz is just match the expression of power. And there's 4 expressions with the 4 descriptions. Match them together. And I will read out the questions to be inclusive. Again, if someone can't see the screen for whatever reason, if my voice is distracting you, just turn your volume down on your device when I'm reading the questions out. So the first expression is power over. Second expression is power within. The third one is power to. And the last one is power with. Those are the 4 expressions. And then you've got these different descriptions. Description A is it's a person's internal sense of dignity, self-worth, etc., and realization of their capacity for the other expressions of power to be achieved. Description B, the capacity to make something happen to someone or something, whether they want it or not, and regardless of their best interests. And C is the capacity of each human being, if you like, or being, depending on your view, to shape their life and influence the world around them. And D, it's working with others to find shared interests and build capacity to affect change. Let's see what you've put, most frequent answers. Okay, let's see what the correct answers are. Yeah, most of you got it right. That's great. It doesn't really matter right or wrong. But yeah, power over is, we're talking about that, making something happen to someone else or something else, whether they want it or not. It's often seen as quite negative expression of power. And it's arguably the most common way that power is generally understood and spoken about. But it's not the only way, because we have power within a person's internal sense of dignity, etc., and their realization to that they have capacity for other expressions of power. For example, power to, which would be the capacity of each individual to shape their own life and influence the world around them, and power with, which crucially is about obviously working with others to find shared interest and build capacity to affect change. Now, I am going to just display one more question before we break. This is quite an easy one. And again, please do come in, anyone, if you want to say anything or ask any questions. Let's have a look in the chat here as well. All right, so this question is, which of the following areas of academic literature has informed the development of pedagogy? You can choose as many answers as you want. Oh, that's interesting, yeah. So, and I've listed out critical pedagogy, transformative learning theory, post-structuralism, learning science, and pedagogy of the privileged. And the answers are, they're all correct. It includes some other literatures as well. I just wanted to point out that the pedagogy has been developed, it's been informed by various influences from the academic literature and also from initiatives, for example, in higher education in the UK, like peer learning, decolonization, inclusion, etc. And to my mind, it kind of synthesizes and pulls together those influences into a kind of coherent framework that names power. And to my mind, some of those existing initiatives, they do challenge orthodox power relations, but I feel like they do it in an implicit way. And the aim of Powergogy is to kind of make the focus on power explicit, name it, talk about it, address it. Christine has asked for a question. Who are the authors of Pedagogy of the Privileged and Post-Structuralism? So there's a few authors in those areas. One of the main ones that has influenced my work in Pedagogy of the Privileged is Anne Curry-Stevens, who's a Canadian academic, and has a really useful paper called New Forms of Transformative Education, Pedagogy for the Privileged. And it lays out a kind of proposed model or framework for working with those privileged aspects of learners' identities. And I don't want to go into this in too much depth now, but it draws on intersectionality. So it's an understanding that everyone has different identities, and each of those identities, for example, you know, I'm a white male British middle-class man with some mental health issues, and each of those identities I've got, you know, is privileged in different ways in relation to other people. So, for example, my whiteness privileges me massively. So does being a man. So does being middle class, etc. My mental health issues perhaps does not privilege me so well in some contexts. So, for example, it's about how can we work productively with those learners to help people understand, you know, how they benefit from unequal power structures, whether they realize it or not, and how all of us then are arguably complicit in the reproduction of inequalities and injustices in society, whether we know it or not, whether we intend it or not, that we're complicit. So great question. In terms of post-structuralism, it's various authors, including Michel Foucault, for example, would be an influence on some thinking about power in the framework. Okay. That is great. Let's just pause. Let's just stop there. That's enough of the quiz for the moment, because I want to move through to some activities. I think what I'm going to do is just not ask you to share the slides. I think it takes a bit too much time. What I'm going to do is we're going to have a break in a moment, because that's inclusive for 5 minutes, but I'm going to just introduce a choice for you to make for the next part of the session after the break. And this is also part of the Powergogy framework. So it's about sharing that control of learning, if you like. All of us are steering the learning, but you have some agency and control to shape what you want to do in the session. It's not just me deciding what we're going to be doing. So you have 3 choices after the break. Option A is to stay in the main Zoom room and do an activity with me called the 1 Minute World Map Challenge. It's from the Powergogy framework. It's a type of activity. And it involves like recreating a map of the world, and then we'll discuss it in relation to Powergogy and power. That's option A. You don't need to do anything if you want to take that option. Option C, I'll go here now, because you don't need to do anything for option C either. Option C is just spend the time as you want. So you're going to have 15 minutes after the break for this activity. Spend the time as you want, just working on your own, or just choose some colleagues from this Zoom call that you'd like to work with. You could just give them a call or private chat them on the Zoom chat, and just look at some of the resources on the session pack and work through them. If you go to the after zone, section C5, for example, you'll see a couple of useful resources there. There's a 5-minute video about how to understand power, and there's a link to the Power Cube website from University of Sussex. Have a look, shape your own learning for 15 minutes. If you choose that option, you don't need to do anything. Now, option B, this is the last option. This is a breakout room activity, so more interactive, working with small groups of peers. And we'll allocate you into breakout rooms after the break, and you'll be with between 2 and 5 people. And I will ask you to watch a 5-minute video about revolving roles, which is a participant-led model from the Powergogy framework that I've used. Some of you may have seen it already. It was on the pre-session materials. If you've already seen it, you could still do the activity. You could re-watch it, or you could just take the extra 5 minutes to start preparing your thoughts about it. Everyone's going to watch the video. and then you're going to have 10 minutes to discuss it, emphasizing, what are some of the possibilities and challenges for how you might implement Powergogy in your context, if you're interested in doing that. So those are the three options. What I would ask is, if you're someone who wants to do option B, go to the breakout rooms. During the break, please, can you just type breakout into the Zoom chat, and I will set up the breakout rooms so they're ready for after the break in 5 minutes. Excellent. Thank you. And let's take a 5-minute break. So we will come back. It's 12:33. I make it so 12:38 and do that activity. See you in a minute. But please do type in the chat if you want to do the breakout activity. Excellent. Thank you, Christine. So Tamara, thanks for your question. Yeah, I'll be available to chat during the break if anyone wants to. If you don't want to hear my voice, just mute me, turn my volume down. So Tamara, thanks for your question, which is, what was the breakout activity again? So the breakout one is, I'll send you to a breakout room with between 2 and 5 colleagues. And I will show you where to access a 5-minute video, which is on the session pack. So all of you will watch the video just individually on the session pack for 5 minutes. And the video is a case study of a participant-led learning model, which I've developed, which is part of the Powergogy framework. It's about students leading their own learning, basically, and one way that you can do that. And then you'll have 5-10 minutes to discuss it with your colleagues in the breakout room, thinking about how you might apply it in your practice, what might be the challenges or opportunities. Yeah, anyone else, please do come in with questions during the break if you want to. And I'm going to start creating some of the breakout rooms. Okay. I'll just wait and see how many people want to do a breakout room. Create a couple of rooms. Yep. A couple of rooms. Let's sign. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Tamara. Jessica asks, I'm interested to do the map activity, but can only contribute via chat. That's absolutely fine. Yeah, no worries. You can absolutely contribute by chat. Yeah. I always try and do sessions so you can choose however to participate, whatever meets your needs best. All right. So we will come back. No worries, Jessica. Thank you. And thank you to anyone who needs to leave during the break. That's fine. I'm just going to check back over the chat. Just going to check my anonymous back channel again. Aronola says, excited about the map activity. That's great. Thank you. I appreciate it. And we will come back in just in a minute or two's time. People who are, well, no, I'll wait to give the instructions for that in case anyone is on the break. I say people who, Penny, if you're still there, if possible, we would need to screen share the slides for the map challenge activity, if that's all right. We could
Yeah.
maybe pull that up now if that's all right, because it might take.
Can you put the link in the chat for me so I don't have to search for it?
The link to the
What you want me
session
to
pack.
share? Is it so it's
It's
on the session pack? I've got
sorry,
it open.
sorry, everything's on the session pack. Yeah, it's section, it's just moving left to right, basically, the session pack. So it's section B6, sorry, section B6.
The 1 minute map challenge.
The 1
right?
minute map challenge. If we could open those slides, that would be fantastic. Thank you so
New
much.
skill set today. I'm developing.
I do appreciate it. It's
It's
appreciate this is a little bit
it's fine. I'm learning.
fiddly. It normally goes much smoother than this, I can assure you. So we've got, all right, that's great. So let's start back. Let's first of all help people doing the breakout rooms. At the moment, let me just double check. I've got Christine O'Leary, Dr. Christine O'Leary, Simon Chung, and Tamara Reed are the people who want to go to the breakout rooms. Have I missed anyone else out? That's the people that typed in the chat. Does anyone else want to do the breakout room? That's fine. In a moment, I will launch the room and send you three to the breakout room. And what I'm going to say is on your session pack, I would show you this if I could, but on your session pack, Christine, Simon, and Tamara, if you go to section B5, revolving roles case study, there is one item there. It has a picture like a recycle, like a triangle picture with 3 arrows. Click on that and it will take you through to a Padlet, and it has the video there, and you can just watch the video. I'd say just don't try and screen share the video for each other, because it won't work very well because of the lag. Just watch the video individually on your own devices for 5 minutes. Turn your microphone off so it's not sending the audio, and then you can just discuss it. And there's instructions on there as well, but it is a collaborative Padlet, so you can also share your thoughts. You can share what some of the opportunities and some of the challenges are for implementing revolving roles in your context. Please do that for yeah, you've got 15 minutes. So got 15 minutes. So you need to be back in the main room here by 5 minutes to 1 for the summary of the session at the end. That's great. Has anyone got questions, Tamara, Christine, or Simon, before I send you to the room? Okay. So you those participants should now be moving to the breakout room. Do let me know if you have any problems, Tamara, Christine, and Simon. And people in this room, let's do the map challenge. So yeah, let's move through. We've got 15 minutes on this one. Thank you. Briefly instructions. So you got, from when I say go, you've got 1 minute to try and recreate a map of the world as accurately as you can. You can do this however you like. For example, you can draw the map on paper, on a device. You can just envision it in your head. Or for example, you could, yeah, just describe the map to yourself. You could even just describe it. You could call someone up, describe it to a partner or someone else on the Teams chat, on the Zoom chat. You can stop there. That's fine. Leave that slide there, Penny. That's fine. So when I say go, go for it. You got 1 minute to try and recreate that map of the world. On your marks, get set, go. You could just go. Oh no, don't worry. It's fine. That's fine. Yeah, off you go. All right, 30 seconds left. No cheating. Don't worry if it's not, if you don't finish it, it's fine. All right, let's do a 10-second countdown. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And stop there, please. That's great. If you want to share your maps on your camera to share off your masterpiece, that's absolutely fine. If you don't worry. But let's have a look at some maps now. And first of all, let me ask you, is this map we're about to see more or less what you had in mind? Penny, please, could you? Thank you. Let's leave it on that one for a moment. 99% of the time when I do this activity, this is the more or less the kind of thing that people have in their mind when they are drawing the map. Let's click through, please, Penny. Thank you. And, this is a very common map in many contexts anyways. I've been around the world, I've worked and traveled in many places, and I've seen this map a lot, including in classrooms around the world. So some people might regard it as a normal map, so to speak. Yeah, we can click through, Penny. That's fine. Just a couple more points on this one. So this is the Mercator projection by Gerardus Mercator, a Flemish cartographer or map drawer in 1569. And it is a projection, of course, because it converts a sphere, the globe, into a flat representation, unless you're a flat earther, of course. And this particular projection prioritizes the accuracy of the shape of the land over the size of the land. So if we look at the size of the land masses here, for example, if we look at the UK compared to the African continent, you could probably fit, I don't know, like 20 UKs into the African continent on that map, okay, which is not accurate. You could fit way more in reality. And so, of course, the projection here is shaped by the author, if you like, the perspective and the purpose of the creator. And one of the purposes for this map was as a nautical navigation aid for ships to get around the world. Of course, at that time, we're getting into areas of colonization and all the rest of it. So it's very interesting. Okay, and Lucy's put, yes, that's what I had in mind, but with Africa and South America, much bigger. Absolutely. So let's click through, please, Penny, to the next slide. So what's different about this map? Lucy's given us a clue already. Here we go. We see, please come in on mic or on the chat if you want to make any observations or comments. We see just what Lucy was saying in the chat here, that Africa and South America are much bigger on this one. They look almost stretched out, but look at the size of Africa compared to the UK and this one. And Lucy's got it. It is the Peters projection. Let's click through, please, Penny. Thank you. So, some people might describe this as an alternative map, and I put alternative in brackets. It is the Peters projection by Dr. Arno Peters, did it in the 70s. So this is the opposite prioritization of the Mercator projection. The Mercator was prioritized the shape accuracy over the size. This one prioritizes the size over the shape. So it's a more accurate representation of land mass compared to other countries. And here, for example, we could fit way more than 20 UKs into Africa. Actually, in reality, we could fit even more than that. But anyway, so some people talk about this map and even the Mercator one as kind of value laden and political. We'll get into that in a moment. But let's look at, where's your home country positioned here? I am from the UK and I've been focusing on that. So that's my centrism, if you like. But in this map and the previous one, the UK is kind of centered, if you like. It's not right in the middle here, but it is on the central axis up at the top as well. And, certainly, the meaning of the center and the top in the culture that I live within is usually that the center is more important than the periphery, and top has a higher status than bottom, right? May not be the same in all cultures. Let's move through to the last one. How about this last map here? Let's have a look. All right, what's going on here? Anyone want to share any comments? Aranola says, I was thinking of an economic map. Emma says, Australian point of view, question mark. That's great. That's a great point. Yeah, so if anyone here is from Australia, which is often referred to as down under in some cultures, now Australia is on top, if you like. The map is flipped. Antarctic, Arctic. Absolutely. Let's click through, please, Penny. And Aranola, that economic map, I think I know the one you mean. I mean, I do an extended version of this activity with about 10 maps, and it's super interesting, but this is just a shortened one. So yeah, we've talked about the positioning of countries has changed. The UK is now down at the bottom, squeezed into the corner. And in fact, this map, I think, was produced in Australia. I'm not certain, but the source is from an Australian website. But the question, so it looks upside down, maybe. That's one way to say it. As Kate says, it looks like it's flipped. The question is it really upside down? And this is the point here. Is it, what is the right way up for the map to be, and who decides? Let's click through, please. So for example, if you're an alien in space, and we have an image here of a little green Martian flying down from a UFO, or if you're an astronaut or a cosmonaut, in other words, if you're a human being with a human frame of reference, such as north south, still, what would be the correct way to see the world? If you're floating in space and you're looking at the globe, at what point do you say, that's up and that's down, that's north and that's south? There isn't a compass point for the galaxy, as far as I know, that pre-exists human beings. So the point is, what does a normal world look like? Let's click through, please. All right, so we talked a bit about this. So what does this have to do with pedagogy, with power, with learning, etc.? Let's explore this a bit more. And let me take let's take a minute just to think about this. What can we learn about power from this activity that we just did? Please share your comments on mic or in the chat, or on the back channel, the anonymous back channel, which I will check now. I'm just going to be quiet for a minute and give you a chance to reflect here. I'll just read out comments that people contribute. So Kate says, we instinctively prioritize our own perspective. Yes. Great point. Jessica says, can see how much that's taken for granted is actually positioning certain places or perspectives in priority. Absolutely. Yes. If we keep going like this, you'll cover all the key points I wanted to make and make my life easier. That's great. All right, that's great. That's a great couple of aspects. Let's move through, please, Penny. Thank you. And you can click one more time. So, well, one thing is that, first of all, I'd say sometimes it helps to turn your perspective upside down. And what we're doing right now, the map activity is an example of what I call in the Powergogy framework a perspective inversion activity. So it's exactly that. It's facilitating a process where learners and ourselves and educators, we're all teachers and learners, just flip everything upside down. Like, take our most closely held assumptions, values, beliefs, flip them upside down and see what it looks like. If you could click one more time, Penny, thank you. And the question is, what do you take for granted as normal? In this activity, we used a map as a kind of vehicle for exploring this, but we can apply this beyond the map activity, of course. What do you take for granted as just being normal in your life, in your interactions with people, in your teaching, in your learning, in your practice? This is the question. Let's move through, please. And Lucy's put in that the status quo can be challenged. Yes, absolutely. And should be, yes. It prompts us to interrogate norms, standards that position some over others. Absolutely. And we can just go into a little more detail in some of these points here for the next few minutes before we go into the summary. So, maps, in my view, basically everything is a product of power, right? And a producer of power. But for example, maps are products of power. They're produced by people exercising the power to project specific worldviews, their own worldviews. And of course, here we mean it like literally the view of the world, but also views about everything else related to our social realities, right? Our lived experiences. Some people have more of different types of power, more capacity to make something happen or affect some kind of change, if you like, by projecting their worldviews onto others around the world as well. As I said, that particular map has been exported globally. The Mercator projection, that is, not the upside down one. I've never seen that in a classroom personally. But maps are framed, in my opinion, as kind of objective and politically neutral. Certainly, when I was young, I was taught that the Mercator projection, this is how the world looks. This is a scientifically produced map, if you like. It's objective. In my opinion, it's not. Nothing is objective. Humans can't be objective. We're subjective. Everything's biased, including maps. Next one, please, Penny. Thank you. And that's because everything is socially constructed through selective decision making. Every single thing that humans do every second of the day is making decisions to select one or two or a limited range of things from a much wider pool. And we're aware of some of those things in the wider pool and some we're not aware of. Okay. And every time we do that, we're shaping the world around us. Next one, please. And maps, thank you, Penny. And maps are also producers of power. So we've talked about how they're the result of power relations being exercised, but they also produce power at the same time. So it's a cyclical process because they're highly political, they're powerful. And I've spelt powerful incorrectly for that reason. They're just saturated with power, and they have an influence in shaping people's worldviews and lives, just like teaching does and learning does. Next one, please. And it's a way for people to learn about who they are in the world to some extent, right? And so let me just pick up a question. Yeah, Mark's put Gulf of America, anyone? Yeah, let's not even get, that's a great point. Let's not even get into that as we've only got a few minutes left, but we could talk all day about that one. But it's a good observation. And Jessica says, yes, also more depressingly, it does show how difficult resistance can be, as none of the other map versions have yet taken hold as the default. Absolutely. And this is really partly what Powergogy is about, because it helps us to start bringing these things to the surface. So it helps us to question who's exercising power in whose interests. And I'm talking about in learning and teaching spaces and out in society, because Powergogy is about connecting those things together. It's about being the change that we want to see in the world. And that can be different for all of us, don't get me wrong. For me, I'd like to live in a world that is more participatory democratic, where a society where people are able to participate in decision-making processes meaningfully that shape their lives and other people's lives. That's the world I'd like to see. So that's the world I try and create in teaching and learning spaces. But Powergogy helps us to dig deep here. How is it, for example, for me, that I accepted the Mercator projection as normal and neutral for so long? And next one, please. What is it? I'm just going to close the breakout rooms as well. So we'll have our colleagues joining us in the main room for the wrap up for the session. So again, what else have I taken for granted? Normal, natural, inevitable, things that can't be changed, power structures that we can't do anything about. And of course, the point here is I'm showing you a type of activity that you might consider using with learners as well, if you think it's an effective way to demonstrate this point. And lastly, how does power relate to this process of learning and unlearning? How are we learning? How is power shaping what we learn and what we might unlearn, if you like? We might unlearn that the Mercator projection is neutral and objective. Let's go to the last slide here. So I'll just make a last point about forms of power. We talked about expressions of power earlier. Here is one more way to look at power. There's three forms. First one is visible. This is an abstract way to describe it, but for example, a person or group of people, let's say person X, consciously and observably exercises power over person Y. Person Y may have grievances about this, but they can't do much to exercise power to stop it. That's one form. That is often understood as what power is by many people, I think, in my experience. But there's also hidden power, which happens more backstage, but behind closed doors, if you like. This is where person X or group of people makes decisions consciously and or unconsciously. They may not even be aware that the choices they're making are exercising power over others. But they're exercising power over person Y, and that person may have grievances in this case, and they may be able to exercise some power in return. So for example, if you're organizing a teaching session, but you weren't involving students in discussing what time it was going to take place, you might choose a certain time that excludes some people from even coming to your session because they have caring responsibilities. You may not have even have thought about that. So you're exercising power unconsciously over someone else. And they may have a grievance about that, but they may be able to come and talk to you about that, and you may be able to change it in future. But lastly, invisible power is where power is exercised over person Y because they just unconsciously internalize and normalize dominant social norms. For example, I internalized the idea that the map was normal, and that idea may benefit some people more than others, may benefit the X person or the group of X's more than others. And there we go. And the last slide on power is this one. Clarissa Hayward talks about then how if we want to think about power in a more complex way, it might be understood as this kind of invisible boundaries that shape what is possible and not possible for everyone in positive and negative ways. Sometimes it's clear to see who the author of the power is, who has the power, and sometimes it isn't so much. It's greater than the sum of its parts. It's like an amalgamation of all these forces that is shaping social norms and what we think of as normal. Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to wrap up this session. And I'm just going to, don't worry about sharing the last slides here. I can just talk through. But in summary, for the last 2 minutes, Powergogy proposes, in my view, a kind of third paradigm. So we had the paradigm of teacher-centered learning, then we had the paradigm of learner-centered learning, and we're kind of still in a shift from teacher-centered to learner-centered. And I'm all on board with learner-centered, but I think there's spaces for both. And the power-centered paradigm goes beyond that. So I think it goes beyond this binary of should we do teacher-centered or learner-centered. Both have a place, but I think the focus should be on the power relations between teachers and learners, between the knower and the receiver of knowledge, etc. Not that we should teach like that. It's also a gogy or a gogy that incorporates and builds on other ones like pedagogy, andragogy, and hertagogy. It synthesizes it into a framework, and it kind of names power at the center of it. And it's about making what is implicit and invisible explicit, laying it on the table, helping people to develop power literacies, to understand power, name it, have the vocabulary and the tools to work with others to go out and try and change power structures in the world, be the change we want to see in the world in learning spaces when we're facilitating them. And there we have it. I hope that's been useful for you. I hope you can go away and think about how you might employ Powergogy in your context. There are resources in the session pack to help you with this. There's also a link to a feedback form in section C1 of the session pack. That would be super helpful, but it is 1 o'clock. And
Yes.
thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Pablo, for that. Thank you so much. And very sorry about the technical issues. And to Penny, you are a star. Thank you for looking after the slides. And you can stop the recording now, Pablo. If you would do that, that'd be lovely. Thank you. And just to say, our next talk will be, if you save it in your diary, is the